You wake up to the sound of Macedonian war horns echoing across the Babylonian palace. Your first breath carries the scent of frankincense, exotic spices, and the distant smoke of funeral pyres. Your father isn't just any man, he's Alexander of Macedon, the conqueror of the known world. The man who wept because there were no more worlds to conquer. The living God who built an empire stretching from Greece to India. You're born into absolute glory, but that glory is fading faster than morning mist. Your cradle is carved from Indian sandalwood, inlaid with Persian gold. But outside your nursery, the greatest empire in human history is tearing itself apart. From your earliest memories, you're surrounded by the sounds of dissolution. Generals arguing over maps that span 3 continents. Persian courtiers whispering about succession in languages you barely understand. Macedonian veterans growing restless as they dream of distant homeland. This is your inheritance. This is the weight of following a god. Your childhood is spent in Babylon, but it feels like living in the shadow of a dying star. Your father conquered everything from Egypt to the Indus River. He founded 70 cities bearing his name. He proclaimed himself the son of Zeus Ammon, but he's also 32 years old and drinking himself to death. The empire that took him 12 years to build is starting to crack under its own weight. Your tutors aren't just Greek philosophers and Persian scholars. They're the survivors of the greatest military campaign in human history. Veterans who fought beside your father from Macedonia to India. Men who witnessed the destruction of Thebes and the burning of Persepolis. They teach you that your father didn't just conquer territory. He conquered the very concept of possibility. Before Alexander, no one imagined that Greeks could rule Persians, that Europeans could command Asians, that mortals could become gods through sheer force of will. Your father appears in your life like Helios crossing the sky, brilliant, overwhelming, and impossible to look at directly. When he's present, the entire palace orbits around him. Persian nobles prostrate themselves before his divine radiance. Greek companions compete for his attention with desperate intensity. Captured princesses offer themselves as tribute to his godhead. But you see what others miss: the tremor in his hands from too much wine, the paranoia that makes him suspect poison in every cup, the exhaustion that comes from carrying the expectations of divinity. Your father notices you watching from behind marble columns. He calls you forward with a gesture that could command armies. You're 6 years old, barely reaching his knee, but his eyes hold the weight of worlds. He places a golden diadem in your small hands. This, he says, pointing to the crown that once belonged to Darius III, represents the conquest of Asia. This, he says, drawing his sword, represents the price of that conquest. Every empire requires blood to build and blood to maintain. The question isn't whether you're brave enough to spill it. The question is whether you're wise enough to know when to stop. Your hands shake as you hold the symbol of Persian kingship. The gold feels warm from his touch, but heavy with the ghosts of its previous owners. You understand that you're holding both your destiny and your doom. Your education becomes preparation for ruling the world. You learn Greek strategy from veterans of Gaugamela, Persian administration from survivors of Darius's court, Egyptian theology from priests who proclaimed your father pharaoh, Indian philosophy from scholars who watched him weep at the edge of the known world. Your father teaches you that conquest has its own logic. Victory creates the need for more victory. Success demands greater success. Empire requires constant expansion or inevitable collapse. You study maps that show your father's route across Asia. Each mark represents battles that rewrote the political geography of the world. Each city represents a culture absorbed into the growing synthesis. Each river crossing represents a boundary that no one thought could be crossed. By your 8th birthday, you've learned 7 languages and witnessed 4 royal executions. You've seen Persian satraps beg for mercy they'll never receive. You've watched Indian rajas offer tribute from kingdoms beyond imagination. You've learned that your father's empire isn't held together by law or love. It's held together by the personal magnetism of one extraordinary man, and that man is dying. Not from battle wounds or assassin's poison, from fever contracted in the Babylonian marshes, from exhaustion accumulated over a decade of constant warfare, from the simple human impossibility of being a god. Your father's illness becomes the empire's crisis. Suddenly, every general remembers his own ambitions. Every satrap calculates his chances of independence. Every allied king measures his loyalty against his opportunity. The empire that conquered the world can't survive its conqueror's mortality. Your father summons you to his deathbed with words that echo across the palace. "I leave my empire," he whispers, "to the strongest, not to you, his son, not to any specific successor, to whoever can seize and hold what he built." It's the final lesson in the logic of conquest. Power flows to strength, not birthright. Empire belongs to whoever can maintain it. Your name means nothing without the ability to enforce it. Your father dies on June 13th, 323 BCE. The funeral arrangements take months. His body is preserved with techniques learned from Egyptian embalmers. A golden sarcophagus worthy of pharaohs is commissioned. But the real question isn't how to honor the dead god. It's how to divide his empire among the living. You're 13 years old, and suddenly, the most valuable piece on a chessboard where the stakes are everything. Not because you're strong enough to rule, but because others can use your claim to legitimize their own ambitions. Every general who served your father wants to be your regent. Every Persian noble hopes to use you as a puppet ruler. Every Greek city-state calculates whether supporting you might restore their independence. You're the prize everyone wants to win and the threat no one can ignore. The partition begins before your father's body reaches its tomb. Perdiccas claims the regency in your name. Ptolemy seizes Egypt and declares it his personal kingdom. Seleucus takes Babylon and the eastern satrapies. Antigonus grabs Asia Minor and dreams of reuniting the whole empire. Cassander controls Macedonia and sees you as an obstacle to his dynastic plans. Each of your father's successors claims to be preserving Alexander's legacy, but they're really dividing the spoils of his achievement. Your minority becomes a 20-year civil war. The Diadochi, your father's successors, fight over the corpse of his empire, battles that dwarf anything in previous history, casualties that empty entire regions, destruction that undoes much of what your father built. You're moved from palace to palace like a chess piece, sometimes honored as the rightful heir, sometimes imprisoned as a dangerous rival, always watched, never trusted, constantly in danger. Your education continues, but it's an education in survival rather than rulership. You learn to read the loyalty in a man's eyes, to recognize poison before it touches your lips, to sleep lightly and trust no one completely, to understand that in your world, yesterday's protector is tomorrow's executioner. By your 20th birthday, you've survived 6 assassination attempts and 3 different regencies. You've watched the empire your father built fragment into competing kingdoms. You've seen cities he founded torn apart by civil war. You've witnessed the systematic destruction of everything he died believing he'd accomplished. The dream of a unified world under Macedonian rule is dead. In its place, you see the reality of human ambition unconstrained by vision. Your father conquered for glory, discovery, and divine destiny. His successors fight for territory, wealth, and personal power. The difference between building an empire and looting one becomes clear. Your opportunity comes when the Diadochi finally exhaust themselves. After 20 years of warfare, the surviving successors are old, tired, and ruling kingdoms instead of dreaming of empires. Ptolemy has turned Egypt into a Hellenistic monarchy. Seleucus controls a vast but unstable Asian empire. Cassander rules Macedonia as a traditional kingdom. Lysimachus governs Thrace like a personal fief. None of them has achieved what your father did, uniting the known world under single rule. You gather supporters who remember your father's vision, not the generals who fought for territory, but the soldiers who believed in transformation. Veterans who followed Alexander to India not for plunder, but for the chance to see the edge of the world. Greeks who believed that barbarians could become civilized. Persians who thought that East and West could unite. Your campaign begins not with military conquest, but with moral authority. You invoke your father's memory, but also his unfinished mission. The synthesis of Greek and Persian culture that he began. The fusion of European discipline and Asian wisdom. The creation of a cosmopolitan civilization that transcends ethnic boundaries. Your early victories are brilliant echoes of your father's genius, not just tactical success, but strategic vision. You don't just defeat enemies, you convert them. You don't just conquer cities, you transform them. You begin to rebuild what the 20 years of civil war destroyed. But you also discover the fundamental problem with your inheritance. Your father's empire was held together by his personal authority. When he died, that authority couldn't be transferred or institutionalized. The vision depended on the visionary. The dream required the dreamer. The empire needed Alexander, not just any Macedonian king. Your successes attract the attention of powers your father never faced. Rome, still a regional Italian city-state when your father lived, has used the 20 years of Hellenistic civil war to expand across the Mediterranean. They've conquered Carthage, subdued the Gauls, and turned Greece itself into a Roman province. The world has moved beyond the age of personal empires. Institutional states now dominate individual genius. Your final battle isn't against another Macedonian general fighting over Alexander's legacy. It's against Roman legions representing a completely different model of power. Not the charismatic authority of god-kings, but the systematic efficiency of republican government. Not the brilliant improvisation of military genius, but the methodical application of superior organization. Your army is everything your father's was: creative, adaptive, personally loyal. The Roman army is everything your father's wasn't: standardized, replaceable, institutionally motivated. The battle is magnificent and futile. Your cavalry charges are masterpieces of tactical innovation. Your infantry fighting is worthy of Marathon and Gaugamela. Your personal leadership inspires feats that belong in epic poetry, but you're fighting the future with weapons from the past. Individual heroism against systematic organization. Charismatic leadership against institutional discipline. The age of Alexander against the age of Rome. You die as your father did, young, at the height of your powers, having achieved the impossible. But your death doesn't create an empire. It ends the last attempt to recreate one. Your supporters scatter to the winds. Your vision dies with you. The Hellenistic world becomes Roman provinces. The age of god-kings ends forever. Your legacy isn't continuation, but conclusion. Not the restoration of Alexander's empire, but proof that it could never be restored. Not the revival of personal rule, but demonstration that the world had outgrown it. The dream your father embodied dies with his last heir. But something else emerges from the failure. The idea that greatness lies not in conquering the world, but in transforming it. That legacy isn't about preserving what was, but inspiring what could be. That the greatest empires are built not by force alone, but by the power of ideas to transcend their creators. Your father conquered space. You learned to conquer time. His empire died when he died. Your failure taught the world how to build empires that could outlast their founders. The Romans learned that lesson well. They built institutions instead of depending on personalities. They created systems that could survive the death of any individual ruler. They remembered that the son of Alexander died trying to be Alexander instead of becoming himself. In the end, your greatest achievement was your failure. You proved that the age of god-kings was over, that the future belonged to those who could build lasting institutions rather than brilliant conquests, that the world had grown too complex for any one person to rule through personal authority alone. Your gravestone might read, "Here lies Alexander's son, who taught the world that being Alexander's son isn't enough." The lesson was learned by everyone except those who most needed to learn it. Future conquerors still dreamed of matching your father's achievements. Caesar, Napoleon, and countless others tried to rebuild what Alexander built. They all learned what you learned: that lightning doesn't strike twice. That genius is personal, not hereditary. That empires built on individual greatness die when that greatness dies. The world moved on, but it moved on informed by your father's vision and educated by your failure. The cosmopolitan ideal he represented lived longer than the empire he built. The synthesis of cultures he began survived the kingdoms that claimed his legacy. The proof that boundaries could be crossed outlasted the man who crossed them. And somewhere in the failure of dynasties and the rise of institutions, the real lesson of Alexander's empire finally emerged. The greatest conquests are not of territory, but of imagination. The most lasting empires are not built by armies, but by ideas. The truest heirs are not sons who inherit crowns, but civilizations that inherit dreams.